Okay. All right, we're going live. Okay. We are back from spring break. I think we're playing live now. This is Andy Flynn. I'm the editor at the Lake Placid News, and I'm being joined by three other people. This is a live news event on Monday, April 25th, 2022. And some of you may have been to the John Brown Farm State Historic Site in Lake Placid. If you haven't, I certainly highly recommend you stopping by either during the season, the high season, the July and August, which you'll be able to see more exhibits and everything, or anytime. Go have a picnic, go cross-country skiing, just enjoy the peace and quiet and reflect on life and all the interesting history and meanings there at John Brown Farm. So I've got three people with us. I've got Brendan Mills. He's been the manager at the John Brown Farm State Historic Site for almost 21 years. We also have Martin Tyler. He's been with John Brown Lives. John Brown Lives is the Friends group at the John Brown Farm State Historic Site. He's been with John Brown Lives for 6 years and is currently the vice president of the board. And we have Martha Swan. She founded the group John Brown Lives in 1999. So we're going to be talking about two events coming up at John Brown Farm State Historic Site. May 9th is 122nd birthday of John Brown. Abolitionist John Brown moved to the town of North Elba in 1849. Brendan, did I get that date right? 1849?
That's correct. The first homestead, yes.
The first homestead.
Which no longer exists, where the Craigwood Golf Course is today.
Gotcha. When did he move to that to the current location?
That was 1855. Okay. And the house was built anywhere between fall and spring of 54 and 55 by his son-in-law, and that was going to be Brown's retirement home. But of course, as soon as he gets there, he gets called away to the fighting in Kansas.
So tell us a little bit about John Brown. Why should we care? Who is this guy? Just you can write a book about it, so let's be brief. But he was pretty darn.
I was going to say, well, John Brown, for most of his life, was a farmer, a businessman, a neighbor, but he was against slavery from the time he was young. His father was against slavery, and as far as I can tell, his grandfather was against slavery. So just as the idea of one race is better than another and slavery is a-okay is brought down from one family to another, say in a southern household, well, Brown was brought up to believe that slavery was wrong. And he worked most of his life on the Underground Railroad. He opposed slavery as much as he could. He did have farms to run, a family to raise. And as I said, he came to North Elba in 1849 to help out a colony of free African-American settlers known as Timbuktu. Left the area when his business went bankrupt, as long as his last business venture. Went to Ohio for a few years, but wanted to come back and continue his work with the free settlers here. And as soon as he gets here, he gets word from his sons who had gone out to Kansas that they were being harassed by pro-slavery men. So what was going to be his retirement home, which is the historic house today, he's only there for a few brief visits from 55 till the raid on Harper's Ferry and his death in 59. But he loved the farm. He loved the Adirondacks, and that's why he asked to be brought back here after his execution after the failed slave uprising in Harper's Ferry.
So there's the raid at Harper's Ferry, the U.S. Arsenal, Harper's Ferry, Virginia at the time, now West Virginia. But yes. That was December 2nd, 1859 is when he was hanged for that crime. And then 6 days later, his body's back in North Elba at the farm, right?
Yes, we tend to dismiss how effective transportation of the age was with the steam engine and the rails. And in fact, it only took 3 days, 3.5 days to get to Vermont, and then another 2.5 days to get from the other 80 miles, so across the lake and then over the mountains to the homestead, because by that time they had to go by ox cart. And his body arrives late on the evening of the 7th, and his funeral occurred that next day on the 8th. Most of the ceremony indoors because his wife was exhausted from the ordeal of bringing his body back after his execution, with about 200 people outside, and then laid to rest in the graveyard. Later on, his two sons and some of the men that fought with him at Harper's Ferry are brought to the graveyard.
So, so he's pretty important to U.S. history, and just before the Civil War, everything erupted, right? So
Yes. So 16 months after Brown's execution, the real war of slave liberation begins, the American Civil War. Of course, a group of soldiers from Boston, who had a sergeant by the name of John Brown, decided to make a song because they had teased him about being this John Brown, and young men being what they were. Most of the time he was okay with it. One time he lost his temper, and young men being what they were said, oh, well, let's make a song about it, to an old church revival tune, Say Ye Brothers Will You Meet Us, which became John Brown's Body. It spread like wildfire through the Union Army, and Brown becomes this symbol of sacrifice and courage to the Union soldier.
So just to set it up for people who have not been to the farm, what's the layout like? I mean, what's there at the farm? What will people see?
Well, first of all, they won't see an actual farm. Many people think it's an active farm with, chickens and cows and things. It's a park. It hasn't been a farm since the 1920s. There's Brown's, well, you're going to come down the entrance road, and you'll see, if on a clear day, you'll see the high peaks of the Adirondacks in the background. And you'll see, as you come into the traffic circle, Brown's house from 1855, the wrought iron gate around the grave site, and the barn, which has of course been repurposed as our visitor center. Off to the side, you'll see my house. So I'm a resident of the park. I've been here, since I started. I guess I'm part of the history too now.
So,
So yes, most people will stop at the traffic circle. They'll often go to the gravesite. We give tours of the house. The house is small, but as we give tours of the house, we take them through parts of Brown's history. Yes, Brown was only there a short time. So, as we take them through, say, the parlor, we talk about Brown's family life. And most people remark, 20 children. Brown had 20 children between two wives. 20 children. How do they all fit in the house? Of course, this was the last house of the family occupied. And so it was the three youngest daughters living home, Sarah, Annie, and Ellen, and the older women married to the Brown family, the daughters and the daughters-in-law and Brown's wife. Similar to many families, countless families north and south in the Civil War, the men went off to fight and the women had to hold down the homestead. But back up just a second. The first house in the Adirondacks, yes, you had 9 of the Browns in a log cabin, smaller than the historic house there, in a log cabin, and an escaped slave named Cyrus living all in one little log cabin like that. So yeah, that was a tight fit.
But ever since John Brown was laid to rest on December 8th, 1859, people, they made pilgrimages on their own, didn't they? That the people
Yes.
came to see his grave, and the big rock that's right there, right? The
Yeah.
boulder.
Yes, Brown's grave becomes a historic or a tourist attraction almost as soon as he's buried there. Through by the 4th of July celebration that next year in 1860, the headstone is mounted. It was his grandfather's headstone. His grandfather was a soldier in George Washington's army and died in the war. Another stone had replaced it. So he found it when he was visiting the family's farm, and brought it up here to have it commemorate Frederick, his son who had been killed out in Kansas. He remembered the headstone, and the night before his hanging, he asked to be buried by the big rock, to be taken in any casket the state of Virginia put him in, and just a simple inscription for himself and his two sons who had been killed in the raid. So that headstone is still there. And it was preserved by the John Brown Memorial Society with a glass enclosure around it. The large stone that's there, well, Brown on a nice day would put a rock up, put a chair up on the rock and look out at the mountains. And so he asked to be buried next to it. Later on, yes, his son Watson and his other son Oliver, who had been killed in the raid, and some of the other Harper's Ferry raiders were removed to the gravesite.
Yeah. So 100 years ago, 1922, the Lake Placid News on page 1, we covered a large pilgrimage. It wasn't just one or two people. We had a lot of people coming from Philadelphia to make a pilgrimage to John Brown's grave. And this is where I want to thanks, Brendan. Well, maybe we'll talk to you in a little bit. But Martin Tyler has done a little bit of research on this. It's a 100-year anniversary, Martin. This is pretty extraordinary. What happened in 1922?
Well, 1922 was the time when a new president was elected to the NAACP chapter in Philadelphia. Actually, he was John J. Max Barber was the founder of the NAACP in Philadelphia, even though NAACP was founded in New York in 1909. But in 1922, J. Max Barber, who was a dentist, became the president, and he was not happy with the amount of history that had portrayed that John Brown, and he felt that John Brown should have better recognition, especially among African Americans. And he suggested to one of his colleagues, also a doctor, Dr. Burwell, that they do a pilgrimage to the John Brown farm, to the site, to the grave site, and put a wreath on his gravestone. So this would have been, they decided to do this, but this would have been the first wreath that was laid since John Brown was buried. And so they did a pilgrimage, and he had never been to this part of the country and wrote very extensively about how beautiful it was in the Adirondacks. And they brought and laid the wreath there on his grave in 1922.
How many people showed up? How many people made that pilgrimage? You know,
they estimated it about 1,000 people, and they were composed of all sorts of professions, and some lay people as well.
That's a lot. That's a lot of people to pack on a train and go north.
That
right?
was Barber's estimate. Yeah.
I imagine most of them came by train. I mean, there weren't a lot of great roads back in 1922.
Yeah.
But 1,000 people, that's a lot. So locals as well, but were there, and a lot of folks from Philadelphia. So that's about 370 miles. Put me in the frame of mind of somebody traveling that far for one man. I mean, what's going through their brain, and why do that just for John Brown?
I think it was mostly that the fact that Barber felt so strongly about John Brown that he had oriented or given a lot of, I guess, talks to his audience and the NAACP, and he really had to persuade them to do this. So it was almost like a one-man thing where he really persuaded a lot of people to get behind his efforts to organize this. I suppose that many of the people were sort of like today. They didn't know much about John Brown. The only thing they knew was the song, John Brown's Body, the Moldering in the Grave, and probably had very little idea of how much John Brown really contributed to the emancipation of slaves and to his effort towards abolition.
I imagine it was there was a big sense of community among the group traveling north and going back, that this wasn't just a bunch of strangers, and even if they were strangers, there was a sense of community with a sense of purpose. Am I getting that wrong, or?
No, I think so. I think also probably has to be brought out that not everybody was in support of this. You know, there was during 1922, segregation was also a factor even in the North and even in that area. So, you know, not everybody was on board with it. But of course, the group that came up with the delegation, of course, they had their purpose in mind. It was foremost, I think.
But that wasn't just 1 year. Didn't they make that an annual pilgrimage, or did they?
Well,
how
that
many
was the
years?
idea. The idea was to make it annual, and the following year, the number of people that decided to participate sort of fell off. But Barbara came along the following year, and from then on, it kind of faded out.
And of course, today, people, tourists from all over come and they do their own pilgrimages because it's a tourist attraction. So, I mean, like Brendan said, from day one, it became a tourist attraction and still is today, just at different levels. But I think what John Brown Lives has done is sort of recreated the whole John Brown Day around May 9th, which is John Brown's birthday. He was born in 1800. And although John Brown Day isn't on that day this year, I think it's on Saturday the 14th. But there's still an event happening on his birthday. And so let's switch over to Martha and talk about May 9th, which I think is a Monday, right? What's happening on May 9th at John Brown Farm that you guys are putting on?
Hi, thanks Andy so much for this opportunity to talk to folks, and also for your role with the paper of as you said in 1922, it was front page news in the Lake Placid news. This pilgrimage to the farm and this through line that you're continuing of interest in history is really wonderful. So thank you. So yes, May 9 this year, John Brown's birthday falls on a Monday. And what we are doing is honoring that occasion with a sunset ceremony, which will involve the installation of Karen Davidson Seward's newest iteration of the Memorial Field for Black Lives. If people visit the farm now, um, Brendan mentioned the house and the gravesite and so forth, but Wren's Memorial Field for Black Lives, which was installed first in 2020 and then again in 2021, we kept it up inside the traffic circle all winter long. So that's still there, and what she has created for this season is a new iteration of the memorial field, or a complement, I should say, to the memorial field, which really focuses on the long struggle for equal voting rights for Black people in our country. And I don't know if Brendan mentioned, but one of the things that people can see at the farm is the Dreaming of Timbuktu exhibition. He mentioned Timbuktu, but that really gives people the story as to what brought John Brown to the Adirondacks. And it was this 1846 voting rights, and it was called in its day Scheme of Justice and Benevolence. So that Wren has created this installation that really harkens back to that history and that long sacrifice and struggle for equal voting rights, will be the centerpiece of our May 9th sunset ceremony. And the modern dance company Emerge 125, which has a home in Harlem and also a home at Lake Placid Center for the Arts, they're going to be doing a dance piece as part of this installation. So that's May 9. That's May 9th. So I hope the public is welcome to come. It will be from 7 to 8. It will end with little kind of flickering lights around the memorial field. So I think it'll be quite moving, and we really hope that the community will come.
You had mentioned what Karen Davidson, right? Karen
Yes.
Davidson Seward. She's being honored on John Brown Day, which is Saturday the 14th. Tell me about what's going on there. You've got the Spirit of John Brown Freedom Awards, right?
Yes, that's right. So, um, as Martin laid out, this pilgrimage started in 1922, and it continued for quite some time. A couple of weeks ago, Martin and Bill Kissel and I were in the Lake Placid Library looking at they have a couple of boxes of John Brown Memorial Association archives, and as best we could tell, we came across some meeting minutes and photo albums and all sorts of memorabilia. But it looked like, and Martin, chime in and correct me if I've got this wrong, but it looks like the John Brown Memorial Association disbanded in 1986, thereabouts. And then, so it ceased for a handful of years until 1999, when Russell Banks and Noel Ignatieff and some other folks revived John Brown Day. So we sort of picked up the torch that next year in 2000 and have kept it going ever since. And again, really that opportunity to focus attention, to draw community together, to remember the people who've gone before us in the struggle for freedom and human rights in our country. And now, because May 9th, the reality of our lives, we try to hold our John Brown Day on the Saturday closest um, to his actual birthday. And a number of years ago, one of our board members who lives in Saranac Lake, Hadley Krutzik Aaron, you remember this, Martin, she said at a meeting one night, we should really recognize people living today who are doing this good, necessary work in the world. So we all embraced the board embraced the idea, and we created the Spirit of John Brown Freedom Award. And Brendan alluded to this, I think, that, John Brown was not only anti-slavery, he was not only an abolitionist, but he was a true egalitarian. So the spirit of John Brown, that commitment to justice, that commitment to equality and an egalitarian community, is something that we really try to lift up with the Spirit of John Brown Freedom Award. So yes, we're so excited that Ren is receiving the award, as is Tiffany Rea Fisher, who's the artistic director of Emerge 125. And one of the things that's so beautiful about these two women receiving this award in 2022 is that together, Ren, Tiffany, John Brown Lives, we've been working together in collaboration for now going on 3 years, particularly around the memorial field and work that Tiffany and her dancers have done in the memorial field and in concert and conversation with Ren and with John Brown Lives. So to be able to present them both together with this recognition is it's really meaningful and very dear to us. And then Tom Morello, who's an activist and a very well-known artist and musician, he's also coming from the West Coast to receive the award. In addition, we have reached out to the NAACP leadership in Philadelphia today, in 2022, and invited them to come. So we've had some conversations, and we're hoping that there'll be representation uh, from this. We wouldn't have a John Brown Day without Dr. Barber and Dr. Burwell. We wouldn't have a John Brown Day. We wouldn't. They've with that gesture in 1922, at a time when, as Martin reminded us, segregation was in full swing, Jim Crow era, lynchings, the denial of the right to vote. I mean, the vulnerability and the danger, right, that many Black people across the country lived in as a daily, on a daily basis, to choose to dedicate themselves to this pilgrimage, right? Um, I feel like we're so indebted to them. They helped establish the John Brown Farm as a shrine, as a sacred shrine and a human rights destination. So to be able to continue that today when we're still facing, so many dire problems, particularly around racism in our country, it's a privilege and a profound responsibility.
And
So we're hoping.
since it was in 1922, many of the people with NAACP in Philadelphia now probably don't realize the contribution that their chapter has made.
Yeah.
And I asked the current president of the NAACP there, I said, do you know who J. Max Barber was? And she says, well, we have a picture of him on the wall, but I'm not so sure she knew the full contribution that he made.
And so we're hoping that Philadelphia folks will come, but we also have just had a very, very special contact. Andy, you mentioned that from the very beginning there were local folks as well as visitors from outside of Lake Placid who met together at the farm, um, and participated in this ceremony. And there's some very, very moving stories from local folks about being there as kids. Naj Wyckoff has a very, very moving story. Kevin Fountain has a very, very moving story. And I'm sure that'll come out in some of these the future articles. And even in the paper, I'm sure it's probably in the Lake Placid News. But one day back in January, I got this call out of the blue from this woman, a black woman who's living in Illinois. She told me the story of when she was a little girl driving with her mother and her siblings from Illinois to Lake Placid, New York. Her grandmother was for a time the president of the John Brown Memorial Association. So I think, her family was very involved and very active. So she describes coming to a part of the country that she knew was probably going to be lily white, I think is how she put it to me. And she and her mother and sisters get to the school. They get to Lake Placid School, and she described being so welcomed by the kids. And her mother, she said, my mother was greeted like she was a celebrity. So, it seems like her mother had been here before. So for Cordelia Nunn is her name, to tell this story some 40 years later. We're working with her to come and share some of her, her recollection and how meaningful it was to her that this place existed and that she was so, as a young black girl, that she was so warmly welcomed by white kids on the playground. So I think it's going to be a very, very special day. Bear Fox, who's a Akwesasne woman, a singer, she's going to be a part of the program and perform a few traditional songs. Um, I think that kind of wraps up uh, John Brown Day. It's open, obviously, all are welcome to come. As Brendan can remind everyone, pay attention to the weather because it's held outdoors under a tent, and it can be, I mean, the winds, it feels like the spirit of John Brown is rolling down the snow-covered peaks of Mount Marcy some days. It can be really, really cold. But we do hope that people will come and enjoy the day. It's a day of such community and such camaraderie and love, really. And there'll be a reception afterwards at Smoke Signal, so people can go to the John Brown Lives website, and that's where we ask people to pony up with a little bit of money to help us support our work.
So Martha, the event itself is what, is it 3 to 5 or 3 to 6?
3 to 5.
3 to 5, and then the reception afterwards starts at 6.
6.
Okay.
6 to 8 at Smoke Signal.
Smoke Signals, and it's free and open to the public. Lots going on.
Yep.
And before we get going, I want to ask of each one of you a question. I'm going to go back to Brendan. Brendan,
Yes.
because you've got a lot of stories to share when people come visit. I'm sure that it's never a dull moment when you're there to sort of interpret the land and the story of John Brown and help people understand when people leave the farm, if they've spent any amount of time there, what do you hope that they take away with them? What's the message?
A um, greater understanding for what happened, for what these people fought for why this became a shrine for those who believe in civil rights and for African Americans. Uh, I think I could say without hesitation that Brown is probably the most controversial figure in American history, and I have had the privilege of educating the public. A lot of the controversy is based on misinformation. So we don't want to seem like we're a cheerleader for John Brown. Obviously, he was a man, he had his faults. However, we want to give people the truth. We want to tell the story and let them make up their minds. And hopefully we've done that correctly. But just to back up for a second, you were asking about the roads and the transportation, about the members of the John Brown Memorial Association. As far as I can tell, they were coming up by car. The rail link was from Saranac Lake in Utica, was kind of out of the way. Also, it was a celebration. They would decorate their cars with pennants. And yes, it was difficult. In 23, they put in the road, which is there now. They moved the barn to its present location and they put in the road because there was this new thing called automobile tourism. Now, remember, yes, it was very difficult to travel long distances by car back then. Finding a gas station, cars broke down frequently. So it's amazing that they did that. And as far as I could tell, it was a celebration where there was food and singing and getting together. But I think I love what I think was Dr. Barber said, that the monuments that they created weren't to honor the dead as much to inspire the living. So.
Martin, I'm just wondering, you didn't grow up in Lake Placid. Where do you live in now, and where did you grow up?
Well, now I live about 15 minutes from North Elba. So
No kidding. Where are you?
I live in Jay.
Oh, you're in Jay. Wonderful. So, but how
But
did
I
you?
grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay.
And as I mentioned earlier, I probably sung the song in school, John Brown's a Body, but that's about all I knew about John Brown. And then one day I did have the occasion to go to Harper's Ferry, and that sort of ignited my interest in this whole thing. And when I moved to Jay, I happened to find out about the reenactment of bringing John Brown's body back to the gravesite. And I decided to go to that. And that was quite an event. Martha can tell you more about that, but that was quite an event to see the reenactment of bringing John Brown's body back and making the various stops on the way to the grave. And so that really ignited my interest, and I did what I could do to try to join the organization.
I just want to clarify. I don't think anyone here today grew up in Lake Placid. Now, Brendan probably came from somewhere else, and Martha and my family moved to Tupper Lake when I was 6 from Long Island. So, so it's.
Yes, I'm from Long Island too.
Really? Okay. So.
What town?
Glen Cove on the North Shore.
Oh yeah, East Islip.
Yeah. So a lot of people in Lake Placid, Saranac Lake, the whole region came from outside the area, and they get involved in history or movements or different groups for various reasons. So that's why I asked Martin how you got involved. Martha, I'm wondering how did you get involved with this, and why are you so passionate about John Brown Lives?
Martin mentioned being at Harper's Ferry and becoming, really, for me, it turned my head around when I went to Harper's Ferry in 1990 something. And, I grew up in Syracuse, and growing up when I did, attending school when I did, and being, in the culture, the dominant white culture, I didn't really learn anything about slavery. I didn't learn anything about abolition growing up, and yet I had in my mind this idea of this guy, John Brown, who was like this white guy who went around killing people. Who was he? What was he all about? So that was my mindset when I went to Harper's Ferry in 1994, I think. But the role you were talking about, Brendan's role, telling stories and bringing people information that they might not have, that role of the interpreter at a historic site is so valuable. And I really attribute my kind of awakening to a Ranger William Banks, then on the staff at the Harpers Ferry National Historic Park, who just turned my head around the way he talked about John Brown's contribution and the language he used to talk about a newly freed people and what freedom meant for people who had been enslaved. It absolutely turned my head around, and I felt very strongly that I had been denied an important part of U.S. history, that my education was there was the miseducation of Martha Swan, because I didn't learn any of this. And so I was pretty obsessed when I was still living in New York City at that time. I was pretty obsessed and made a return trip to Harper's Ferry and was just really, I really thought, white people, we need to know this history, right? I mean, we all need to know this history, but white people in particular really need to know that there's this family, this Brown family, who followed these black settlers to the Adirondacks and who sacrificed their lives for human freedom and equality. And I thought that just, we're so, I think that one of the reasons we're in the state that we're in terms of how alive um, racism still is in our culture, one of the reasons I think is because our history has been distorted, right? For my generation, not so much younger generations, I don't think. And if we don't learn about white allies in the struggle for Black freedom, then um, we're bound to have, skewed views on things, I think. So when I moved to the Adirondacks for completely unrelated reasons in 1997, and I see the historic marker outside of the courthouse in Elizabethtown where Brown's body was lay in state before burial, I just, that was the turning point. That was the turning point in my life when I said, oh my gosh, why don't we talk about this history? Why aren't we dealing with this all the time? And then to find out why he came here, because of this voting rights scheme of justice and benevolence. He was following these black settlers here. I thought, my God, we need to know this too. So that really that's been my story. And I feel extremely privileged and very lucky and blessed to be able to do this work.
I don't know, has a big piece been left out when, Brandon, if we were to talk about the land being given to the slaves in this area? Did we mention that at all? Is that a part of the story?
Well, they weren't slaves; they were free citizens of New York State.
Right.
The
Former slaves,
of the,
as I understood. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, in one way or another, they were connected to slavery, either from a generation or there was in some other parts of the land grants, there was sort of a don't ask, don't tell policy. And yes, some former slaves did get land, but in this area, we try to counteract the myth. The myth was that Timbuktu was a central compound with log cabins in a circle with a big red flag that said Timbuktu, and they were all escaped slaves, and it was a hotbed of the Underground Railroad. Of course, the truth is far from that. Thanks to Martha Swan and John Brown Lives, they brought an exhibit to the farm, Dreaming of Timbuktu, which is a fantastic exhibit in the upper part of our barn that tells the story about how it was voting rights and how there was a property, African Americans had to have $250 worth of real estate to enable them to vote in New York State elections. And of course, whites did not have that requirement. And In protest, land was donated by a philanthropist. Sorry, name coming out of my head right now. Martha.
Garrett Smith.
Garrett Smith. I'm sorry. Yes, Garrett Smith, who donated thousands of acres of his own land holdings here in the Adirondacks to African Americans, 3,000 grantees, to give them, if they came out and farmed the land, that is, cut down the trees, built a cabin, planted crops, it would then be worth enough money for the voting rights. And so the African Americans that came out here drew Brown to the area. And he was here to teach them farming techniques. He'd been a farmer his whole life. It was his first love. It's what he did best. And the families that came here, I mean, obviously there was a lot of things that, it wasn't a successful, settlement in the way that, thousands of people flocked here and they stayed here. Most of the grantees left after the Civil War, except for the Epps family. And but it did have its successes. All the grantees voted. There were no segregated schools. There were no segregated cemeteries. And you were asking about something with Brown, or I'm sorry, maybe Martha made the remark that, Brown in many ways was an old-fashioned fellow, even by the standards of the day. If you saw him walking down the street, you might mistake him for a Quaker with the cut of his clothes that were kind of behind the times. He didn't like to take visitors on the Sabbath. He wouldn't gamble, he wouldn't drink. But where he was ahead of his time was race relations. And he believed in equality between the races. He also believed in equal rights for women. And one of the accounts of the first house in the Adirondacks is visitors coming across, getting lost in the woods, coming across his cabin. Brown has them sit down to dinner with members of Timbuktu. And the one visitor who wrote down the experience, even though he was an abolitionist, he didn't discuss the abolitionist movement with Brown because there were African Americans present. He didn't feel it was appropriate. But also, he remarked that everyone sat down at the same table, that is, whites and African Americans. Brown introduced the members of Timbuktu by their surname, and he expected the whites to shake hands with them. And Richard Dana, who wrote down the experience later on, it kind of raised his eyebrows, because even most abolitionists of the day were lukewarm at best when it came to equality between the races. So I hope that long-winded answer was okay.
Can I just chime in with something else related to
Yeah.
Timbuktu? So we, the Pomeroy Fund for New York State History they gave us a grant to have one of those blue and yellow historic markers that you see around, to have a historic marker acknowledging Timbuktu fabricated, and that's going to be installed, we think, on July 2nd. We have to finalize everything, but to be installed on Old Military Road and Bear Cub Road, close to where the archaeologist Hadley Cruikshank and Dreaming of Timbuktu curator Amy Godine, where they think one of the Timbuktu settler families, where their homestead was. So that will be the first, as Hadley has put it, that really changes the commemorative landscape of the region. And hopefully that will draw more attention to the richness, the complexity, the importance of the history right here in our own, our own community, our own region.
Well, I just want to thank everybody. Brendan Mills, manager at John Brown Farm State Historic Site, and Martin Tyler and Martha Swan from John Brown Lives. Thanks, everyone. Did you want to add anything before we get going?
I just want to say thank you again, Andy. I really appreciate your interest in this time, and thanks to Martin and to Brendan too.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And just to remind everybody that if you want to learn more about John Brown Farm State Historic Site, you can Google John Brown Farm State Historic Site, and it take you to the, was it New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation?
Yes.
They've got a
and we have our, and we've got a Facebook page as well.
Okay.
And they can just call me.
Okay. And John Brown Lives has a website, johnbrownlives.org, and you can learn all about the different events there. Of course, May 9th, 122nd birthday of John Brown. 7 o'clock is the sunset event. That's free and open to the public. And John Brown Day is Saturday, May 14th from 3 to 5. And then there's an evening reception from 6 to 8 at Smoke Signals. That's a fundraiser in the evening, but it's free and open to the public from 3 to 5. One last question. I just remembered, Martha. Do you have Jerry Huntley coming to John Brown Day?
Oh, thank you so much, Andy, for reminding me. Yes, so many of you, your viewers, are probably aware and have been touched by the amazing Jerry Huntley, who's the creator of the Our Story Bridge project, where she's working with different communities to collect community stories, right? So she reached out to us a couple of months ago, and she's going to be taking the first stories for um,
I think we lost Martha.
If we lost the
the
connection there,
president of the
sorry.
NAACP
Oh, there she
coming
goes.
to really help begin to gather this rich repository of memory.
Great. So
Yeah.
Jerry Huntley will be there to record some stories for the
Yep.
for the oral history project.
I
That's
think
right.
we
We're calling it.
lost part of Martha's. Catherine Hicks is the current president of the NAACP in Philadelphia. And so we've asked her if she could try to arrange a delegation to come up and celebrate the occasion too.
Nice. Good. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Look forward to having to covering these events and telling everybody about them. And thanks for joining the Lake Placid News with our latest live news broadcast. Take care. You guys have a good evening.
Good evening.
Good night.
Evening.
Thank you.